Let me kind of get right to it in terms of the first speaker. The bios we've put up on the website. So as we introduce speakers, I'm not going to read their bios or bore you with all those details, but hopefully maybe give a little bit vignette about each one that I may know. In particular, Dalal, I've known now almost for 20 years going back. And while he has this extensive biography and set of accomplishments, one of the things that I noticed that wasn't on there that I think is really an example of how forward-thinking he is back in, I believe it was 1998, he was one of the architects of something called the Outsourcing Research Council, which was a group of companies that got together in the early days about BPO and formed and started doing research. And that became the nucleus for ultimately something that became the International Association of Outsourcing Professionals, of which he's been associated with and is the thought leader. So, he really has been in this industry and outsourcing for a very, very long time. He's the architect of a great deal of thought out there. He's written, he's published, he's spoken, and I'm also very proud to say he's actually a dear personal friend of mine. So, Jag, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Actually, my presentation, what I'm going to try and do is really set the context for outsourcing and set the context for why people outsource. I'm also going to talk about that what have we learned now that we've gone through these 3-4 decades of outsourcing. Actually, outsourcing dates even further back, and I'll just talk about it later. But I'm going to talk about what companies need to focus on and why outsourcing is important. But I'm going to put that in the context of you're not outsourcing because you have to. You're outsourcing because you want to. And that's the whole thing about changing the shape of the business. So I'm going to bring everything in the context of that if you decide and when you go down the path of outsourcing, it is for a reason. It's for a reason, and one of the key reasons, as I believe, is changing the shape of the business. You can't outsource and not change the shape of the business, and vice versa. So I'm going to talk about that in that context, and hence the whole thing is about changing the shape of the business, and who knows, one of these days you might be having an office in a building that looks like that, because that is a change in the shape of the business. So we're going to talk about 3 things, talk about what's causing people and companies to change the shape of their business, going to talk about how outsourcing is playing a role, and then bring into the context of SDI, how MRO outsourcing plays a role in it. And in the context of changing the shape of the business, in the context of the business, how does MRO outsourcing play? Hopefully I'm not doing anything unusual here. What are the reasons for change? I like to present it in a fashion that says that, hey, there are disruptive changes. We sort of talked about it. There are lots of things that are happening in the world, in the global, in the economy, that's causing disruptive changes. What that's going to do is for companies to create a cause for action. You can't let those disruptive changes kind of stay out there, because that's going to make the disruptive changes change your business. Go ask Sony Walkman what happened, right? Sony Walkman had a disruptive change, and cause for action was they had to do something different, which they hadn't, and therefore the Sony Walkman is a dead man. What we've got now, actually it's kind of interesting story about a Sony, that they are the largest provider of the camera for iPhones and digital cameras. So they sort of created a totally different kind of a business because they lost out on the Walkman. So it creates for companies cause for action. That creates what I call change agenda. Change agenda says that I can no longer be the same as I used to be, because disruptive changes is giving me a cause for action, and I got to change agenda. I have greater flexibility. I got to lower my profitability point so that when I have revenue challenges, I still can deliver the value that my shareholders are expecting from me. So it's change agenda. It's really looking at things that I got to do things differently, and as a result, you come up with some strategies and action. Whenever I put this slide up, my comment always is that just think backwards. Think backwards that if I have these strategies and action, how is it a part of my change agenda? What is it that's causing me to have that change agenda, and what disruptive change I'm addressing? If you can't really go backwards and solve that, maybe the strategy and action you're taking may not be the appropriate one at that point in time. So every strategy and action has to have a basis for change agenda, calls for action, and addressing some disruptive change that's going to make sure that as you implement the strategy and action, you are delivering what is expected from the business. So what are the potential strategies? Well, revenue growth. Well, that's easier said than done. Profitability point, reduce the direct costs so that your profitability point goes up. Reduce the indirect costs, reduce the other costs such as the overhead and MRO, et cetera, so that the overall you're creating higher net profit. And then finally, what I consider to be critical is rethink the business model. Rethink it the way you've always done it. Just again, back to Apple. Do you know what the Apple's disruptive technology is? It's the iTunes. It's the iTunes that really altered. It's a totally different business model. It had nothing to do with the product. The iPod is nothing any different than what anyone else could have done, but it's the iTunes. And then subsequently the iTunes Store and Apple, the Google Android Store, et cetera, that has altered the shape of the business and rethink the way they've done it. And that's what I'm saying. You need to become flexible. You have to be able to change on a dime. What's causing difficulty in doing that are all these factors. You got disruptive changes that you're not aware of yet. You have not studied them. You got shareholder value, and I'm going to talk more about it, that there is pressure. There is pressure that says you got to continuously improve profitability. You got to show growth. You got to show higher value, and you got to increase your market cap as you go forward. You got resistance to change. The niche of the business is that there is a core, there is a function that is core to the particular business you're in. Whatever your product is, whatever your service is, that's core. And then you have other providers in a network that are closely aligned to you, that have a common goal, that are atomically connected with you so that they move, but they're not part of you. And that is what I consider to be the new shape of the business, that may keep the core as solid as possible, where your competency is, where you're going to create the best value for your shareholder. That's where you're going to have opportunity to be disruptive, because you're small and you can change on a dime. That's why Apple began by having somebody else build their computers. Apple didn't build their own computer. They said, hey, we're experts in marketing, we're experts in design, we're experts in ideas. And that was their core. And they said, we're going to go out and have somebody else build it for us. And that's the part. And the reason I'm calling it atomically aligned is that it's not just to throw it over the wall and see if that works. The outside companies have to have the same goal, same value, and same delivery, so that at the end of the day, they're part of the solution and not part of, oh, I got to take care of them as well. And to me, that becomes the foundation for outsourcing. Let's start with a simple equation. You all know what this equation is, right? Of course you do. What's the shareholder value or value? Take out the word shareholder, it still means the same thing. What's value? Value is a value created minus value destroyed times the confidence factor. Okay? Take a sip of coffee and think it. It's a very simple formula, isn't it? You're always thinking of how much value you're creating, how much value you're destroying. That takes away from you. You could not come out with a new product. That's a value destruction. Well, a great example of that was the LinkedIn. In fourth quarter of last year, LinkedIn came out and met the revenue and a profit goal for that market was expecting, and actually exceeded a little bit. Their shares dropped. Why? Because they said that we do not have a confidence in meeting our number for next year. What did the market do? Market looked at the value destruction side of it and said that, and a reduced confidence factor, that they can't deliver what they're predicting, and therefore their market value dropped. So what are the things that people look at as value creation? Well, these are the things that create value. New products, new market, opportunities, profitability management, cycle time, bringing out product as fast as possible. But on the other side, there are a whole bunch of things that are value destruction, cost growth, capital misappropriation, misapplication. I mean, when there's a limited amount of capital, what are they investing their capital in? Are they putting their capital in bringing in new sales force? Are they putting capital into new product? Are they investing capital in increasing and opening new markets? Or are they putting their capital in buying cars for their executives? Or are they putting capital into putting computer systems for back office operations, which are not directly contributing to the profit? So the question is that these are the kind of things that destruct the value. Change management, reluctance to change. How fast can a company change? There are several examples of the ability to change quickly that has brought the company to the forefront. Nokia. Nokia is a great example of it. Do all of you know that Nokia, what business they were in before they started making telephones? They used to make shoes and boots. They were in a consumer goods business. What did they know? They knew their customers. They said, hey, we know the customers, so they said, we're going to come out with a phone. But we know that the customers like to change quickly. So they had a goal against Motorola at the time, who had the 90% market share. What Nokia's goal was, we're going to come out with a new model every 6 months. New color, new shape, nothing major. What they did was they really captured a tremendous amount of market. And that's a classic case that they were not reluctant to change, to go far afield from where they came from, because they knew what the core to them was understanding their consumer, understanding consumer behavior, and the market. So these are the things that create value destruction. So now this is where you're going to take a moment and think through. In your business, so now when you ask about to a provider, to SDI, to Andy, tell me what's your value proposition, what side are you going to focus on more? Because these are the things that you may not be able to control effectively, that can they do this for you? Can they help you manage your cost growth? Can they create with innovation new way of managing MRO? So the whole idea is to take a look at not what are they contributing in terms of the cost, but what are they doing to make sure that the value destruction elements that I have today are minimized. They never go away. They're minimized. So that's the whole idea of keeping this equation in mind, that it's not just about creating the value, it is about minimizing the value destruction, and above all, creating a higher level of confidence factor that with the implementation of this strategy, your value is going to be created and your value destruction is going to be minimized. That's the confidence factor you need, and we're going to talk more about it. And now I'm going to put all of this in the context of how is outsourcing playing a role in changing the shape of the business. When I look at the organization, I really break down organization into really 3 parts. So organization have a set of people and processes and technology that do the transactions. You have a set that does process management, and then you get strategy and vision. That's the part, strategy and vision, is where they're focusing on the outside. They're focusing on the disruptive forces outside. They're looking at the competition. They're creating the change agenda. That's the vision and strategy. What have we seen a lot in the industry? Most of the investment, most of the budget goes in here, leaving less for here. The whole idea of outsourcing is take a look at and take all of the transactions and part of the process management and outsource it so they can improve the process, they can make the investment in technology and make it different, better, etc., allowing you as the customer to focus on strategy and vision. Steve Jobs wanted to outsource manufacturing of Apple iPad because that was not important to him. That was a transaction for him. He wanted to focus on creating the next product, next way of marketing, whatever the genius things he was going to think about that he stole from Xerox where I used to work. That's another story, another day. That's the idea. So idea is that when you think about outsourcing, one of the things you have to think about is, what am I going to do once I outsource? How am I going to apply my knowledge, my investment, my capability, my skills into strategy and vision? That's more important to your business as a customer, not managing transactions. Managing transaction is actually taking away the time, the investment, the people, the resources, the focus away from it. And that's the whole idea of the outsourcing, is to take a look at and outsource these so you can invest more up in here. There's always a question that, hey, outsourcing, how are you going to tell me what you're going to save for me? And what I've got is a very simple way I can always say, hey, there are 3 things you can do in any process. You can reduce the cost, you can shorten the cycle time, and you can improve the quality. And the whole idea for me in the outsourcing is you can't focus on only one thing. You can't only focus on reducing costs, because that's a very tactical thing. What happens once you've reduced costs once? You're done. It's one and done. So you have to focus in the outsourcing arena that how am I going to not only reduce costs, but reduce my cycle time, improve the quality, make me more flexible, make me more competitive in the marketplace. Not just because I'm cheaper, but it is because I'm better, but more importantly, with predictable results. And that's what the basis of foundation for the outsourcing is, that outsourcing is not just faster, better, cheaper, but outsourcing is faster, better, cheaper, and with predictable results over a period of time. And the reason is that the outsourcer's only business is focusing on just that one thing. It's a totally different model. It's a totally different focus. Their core of the atomic organization is what creates value for them. It is what you're looking for. It is what you're going to pay money for in the outsource arena. So that's the idea in the outsourcing. And it's interesting in the IOP, as Andy mentioned, I'm very active in it. We do survey every year. And really it shows that only 49% of the people that we surveyed said reducing costs. Yeah, it is the most amount of people. However, there are 51% who said they outsource for reasons other than reducing costs. Innovation is probably one of the 3% of people talk about innovation. Because I can't invest, I cannot innovate, and therefore I have to go out and get somebody else to do it for me. Any business decision comes into this kind of continuum. Any decision, forget business decision, any personal decision, any business decision, come down to a point that it's a balance of risk versus the value, risk versus the benefit. And you're going to kind of balance it. That until those risks are identified, values mean nothing. It's like thinking about climbing Mount Everest. If you can't get past all those risks, forget about what you're going to see when you get on top of the Mount Everest. So the whole idea in the outsourcing is that as a business, you got to identify what are all your risks. What are your risks of not doing anything? What are the risks of keeping that function in-house? What are about those disruptive changes? What about that 20-year-old kid in Indonesia? All of those are risks, so you got to think about risk in 2 different ways. The first, you're going to think about the risk, a risk of doing nothing and keeping it in-house. Think about Ford Motor and their vertical integration and Mazda Miata example. Those are all the risks of doing nothing. So there are a set of risks that you're going to talk about first in terms of the risk of not doing anything. And then once you decide to outsource, you're going to talk about the risk within the outsourcing. That I'm going to have some exposure. And as a provider, what are they doing to make sure that those risks are covered? And I believe that until you get to a certain point of consideration, values don't mean anything. I mean, I have an opportunity to go to Russia to give a speech in July. And they said, hey, great. I said, hey, you got to fly me at least business class or first class. They said, fine. He said, well, we'll book you on Aeroflot. Wait a minute. That risk is not up to my consideration point. So I'm going to think about, so to me, I said, fine, I'm going to charge you less if you allow me to fly on an American carrier. Because to me, the risk the consideration point wasn't there because the risk was far greater. So you don't think about any proposition, outsourcing or otherwise, when the risk is not up to a consideration point. When you reach a certain level, it becomes a decision point, and then finally it reaches a level where it's compelling. Why would you have your own supply chain when UPS is out there? Why would you want to manage your own network when there are companies that are proficient in managing network, the cloud, the computers, et cetera? Those are all in the area of what I consider to be a compelling point. Let's talk about how MRO outsourcing plays in this. This is a purely theoretical way of kind of explaining. So in my head, I always think of a company as having a set of processes that I call contributing process. These are the processes that generate revenue. These are the processes that differentiate you in the marketplace. These are the processes that shareholders pay higher money for. And those, I call them direct contributing processes. We've had many discussions here. People call it core. I personally hate the word core, because calling any function core is fighting in a functional foxhole. I want to protect something, I'm going to call it core. You can't touch it. So I have a problem, and the second part of the problem is that core may not be what's visible to you. Core for Nike is branding. Core to them is not product. Core to them is branding. So core could be any different things. However, Nike has direct contributing processes that take the order, distribute, and then post-order support. That I call them direct contributing processes. Then you have a set of what I call indirect contributing processes. That these are the processes that are necessary, that without those processes, direct contributing processes do not deliver results. This is my version of Maslow's theory of hierarchy. Maslow's theory of hierarchy always talks about it, that for the human people, unless certain basic needs are met, there is nothing beyond that in terms of motivation. Maintenance factors are some motivational factors. To me, that's equivalent to this. This is Jag's Maslow theory that says that direct contributing processes cannot succeed if these don't do the job. And then you've got a set of support processes that support both of those. And those are like information technology, human resources. I'm sorry I didn't include finance, because finance has to be, I'm not sure it's a contributing process in many organizations. If I had it here for non-contributing process, maybe I would, never mind. I used to be a good friend of CFOs when I was a CIO in the company, so I never said those kind of things. Ever since I became a consultant, I pick on them. Anyway, so that's how I look at the processes. So that's, to me, the MRO management is an indirect contributing processes, meaning that if the MRO management is not good, this won't succeed. If MRO management is good, it doesn't make any difference. So MRO management is a non-contributing, indirect contributing process that has to deliver in order for the direct contributing process to deliver annual results that the company is looking for. So how do you identify what are the indirect contributing processes? Well, the question is, do they directly contribute? Of course, that's the name. Are they a threat to disrupting success of the business? If something goes wrong, a wrong part gets introduced, it can disrupt, it can stop the assembly line. So you're talking about, is it considered high priority for investment? I mean, take a look at indirect contributing processes, support processes. What do they suffer from? Lack of capital investment. Because companies, when they're making capital distribution, they're going to say, hey, my capital is better used in revenue generation. My capital is better used in direct contributing processes and improving those, as opposed to investing in better systems for MRO management, HR, finance, whatever. Do they have a clear view of its expenses and investment? Do people really understand? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that from the MRO perspective, in terms of what are true expenses involved in there. Is it led by leaders that are considered critical to the business? did the last CEO come from that function? Coming as a CIO from the past, that's been one of the things. Question is always asked, is CIO an important position? The question is asked, how many CIOs become CEO? Well, not a whole lot. Therefore, it is not a key contributing function because the leaders do not come out of that organization. Is it operating level that can be considered a market performance? Is it at a level where you have benchmarked and said, yep, this is performing at a level where I can actually sell that service to somebody else? Can it be an expert in the area improve it? Those are the kind of questions you ask, and if the answer comes out no or probably no or etc., those become indirect contributing processes. And to me, anything that's indirect contributing processes are open, subject to outsourcing, have another expert, have somebody else come and do it because they are expert in it, they have experience in it, they innovate in it, and they make investment in it. It is their only core focus. In my atomic diagram, it is what's in their core. Quality comes in all flavors, in all forms. And that's a very simple. Any of you have seen this formula? Philip Crosby, the quality guru, that's his equation, not mine. Philip Crosby, in his equation, said the cost of quality is equal to cost of conformance plus cost of non-conformance. And what are those? Cost of conformance are the cost of providing product and services by a given specified price manner. Cost of non-conformance are the failure costs associated with the process not being under control. Cost of non-conformance is warranty. Cost of non-conformance is stopping of that assembly line because the wrong part was delivered. Cost of non-conformance is having to add more people to get the job done. Cost of non-conformance is overtime. Those are all costs of non-conformance. Costs of conformance are improved processes, technology, innovation, and focusing on what matters for that particular process. So the whole idea, to me, in the outsourcing, is to think about not the cost of conformance, but talk about the cost of non-conformance that you can control. Go ask Andy that, hey, identify for me what are the costs of non-conformance of mismanaging MRO. Let's calculate that first. And if we can eliminate that, or if we can reduce that, you're reducing cost of non-conformance, which improves the overall cost of quality. And it's not about cost of conformance at that point in time. It is about cost of non-conformance. And the reason people don't focus on cost of non-conformance is you have to look inside. Cost of non-conformance, you have to admit that you make mistakes. Cost of non-conformance is saying you don't have solid processes. Cost of non-conformance is saying we don't have metrics. Cost of non-conformance is we don't have experience. Cost of non-conformance is we don't have investment in the right place. That's all cost of non-conformance. And we don't look at that because that's looking at our bad shadow. So idea is that when you think about improving the quality, you got to think in terms of reducing that cost of non-conformance rather than improving the cost of conformance. Iceberg. Cost of non-conformance in iceberg. We only see the top part of it. Maybe 20% of cost non-conformance is seen. It's the 80% that's hidden that we don't see. It's having that wrong part sitting in the crib for a year or 2 years or 5 years. And when it's needed, it's out of date engineering-wise. I have no idea what I'm speaking about, but that's what Andy said I got to say about MRO. That wrong part in the crib is a hidden cost. It's the iceberg, that's a cost of non-conformance that's sitting underneath. So the idea of the managing is really identifying all of the cost of non-conformance and say, how are we addressing it so that that cost of non-conformance is brought to as small a number, if not zero, as possible, so that at the end of the day, the result improves the quality of the overall operation.